He hadn't seen a face beneath a blanket in 12 years. The trading post smelled of dust, whiskey, and old sweat. A single lantern swung by the counter, throwing long shadows across stacked crates and bent nails scattered on the floor. Wind pushed against the walls, the boards moaning like tired bones. The rancher's hands were cracked, leathered from rope and sun. He reached forward, slow. The wool blanket was rough against his fingers, damp, as though it had soaked up years of someone's silence. He pulled it back. A face. Pale, bruised in places that told of fists and nights without kindness. Her eyes blinked against the lantern light, not in fear, but in surrender. The sound of her breathing was thin, broken, like a horse too long pushed to the edge of winter. "I'm not worth a dime," she whispered. Her voice cracked like glass about to split. The room went still. Even the lantern flame seemed to pause. The rancher didn't answer. His throat was tight. He only studied her, the way a man stares at something he can't quite name, part memory, part wound. The edges of his vision blurred with the ache of it. She trembled, clutching at the blanket as though it could vanish her back into nothing. He noticed the marks on her wrists, not fresh, but deep enough to stay with her forever. His hand, the same one that had pulled the cloth, now hovered uselessly in the air. He wanted to offer her something, a word, a touch, a piece of his silence, but nothing came. Instead, he lowered his gaze to the counter. A chipped mug sat there, half filled with cold coffee. He reached for it, but his fingers stopped short, curling back. Coffee had always been his anchor, a ritual of mornings no matter how empty they felt. Tonight, the cup sat untouched. Outside, the wind picked up. A shutter clapped against the wall like a warning shot. She shifted beneath the blanket, eyes dropping. "Don't look," she whispered again, softer this time, more to herself than to him. The rancher swallowed, his jaw tight. He thought of 12 winters past, of another face, another blanket, another whisper. A grave dug, shallow because the ground was frozen too hard. He had covered that body with the same kind of wool. He had told himself he'd never pull back a blanket again. But here he was. The trader coughed from the back room, metal clinking against metal. The ordinary noise broke the moment, scattered it like embers, but the rancher stayed frozen, staring at the fragile figure before him. The blanket had fallen heavy on the counter, pooled at his boots like the start of a storm. He didn't know if he was meant to walk away or stay. The lantern sputtered, shadows bending across her face. Her lips parted as if she might say something more, but she didn't. She only stared at the floor, her silence louder than any cry. The rancher's breath came slow, steady. His hand rested on the wood, near hers, but not touching. Between them, the air felt sharp, like frost before dawn, like the weight of a decision not yet made. Outside, the wind carried the sound of coyotes calling. Inside, 2 broken lives sat in the glow of a lantern, with nothing but a blanket between them. And the night held its breath. The ride home was dust and silence. The mare's hooves sank deep into the road, each step heavy, dragging dusk with it. She sat behind him, wrapped in his old coat, her hands knotted together as though still clinging to something unseen. The rancher's jaw stayed set, stone-carved, eyes fixed on the horizon. The land stretched endless, a sheet of dying earth cracked open by drought. Her eyes moved more than her lips, darting, watching every shadow, every sway of mesquite against the wind. He felt the weight of her fear pressing into his back, though she never said a word. By the time they reached the cabin, the sun was a thin line bleeding into the earth. He swung off the saddle slow, his limp more noticeable after long hours on horseback. He didn't glance at her, not directly, only untied the reins, led the mare to water, and left the choice for her feet to follow. She did. Inside, the cabin smelled of smoke and wood oil. The firelight on the stone hearth painted them tall across the walls, 2 figures stretched into shadows, moving separate, yet bound to the same flickering light. He set bread and beans on the table, plain fare, and stepped back. She barely touched it, 1 swallow, maybe 2, enough to keep breath in her chest. He didn't press her. He only lowered himself into a chair, boots planted on the worn floorboards, and poured coffee into a tin cup. He drank. She watched the steam rise like a veil between them. The night stretched on, no questions, no answers, just the silence, the kind that grows thick, heavy enough to fill a room. But in small, flickering ways, trust found its cracks. When he left water by her bedside, she drank it. When he went out at dawn, she folded his coat, smoothing the torn seam at the shoulder with care her own life had rarely known. He saw the lines etched into her wrists when the firelight caught them right. She saw how his steps faltered when thunder rolled outside, his hand tightening against the chair arm as though holding off some ghost. The land around them mirrored the both of them. Fences leaning sideways, roof shingles warped, soil split open, thirsty, nothing whole, nothing strong. And yet, beneath the fence posts, in the dry cracks, a few wildflowers dared to push through. Yellow, small, stubborn agay. Gnawed the dust. Neither of them spoke of it, but both of them saw. She watched them longer than he did. He noticed that. By the third night, she'd eaten a little more. By the fourth, she left her blanket folded at the foot of the bed instead of clutched against her chest. He found himself listening for her breath in the dark, not to measure her presence, but to assure himself she hadn't slipped away. Two shadows, two broken things. Slowly, without words, they began to lean toward the same fire. The wind rattled the window, the fire crackled low, and outside the wildflowers held their ground against the night. The first hoofbeats came with the wind, low, steady, like thunder rolling over dry earth. The rancher heard them before she did. His hand stilled on the coffee pot, her breath caught, sharp, as if her bones remembered the sound before her ears did. By the time she looked out the narrow window, they were already there, shadows cresting the ridge, 5, maybe 6, riding hard, the horizon swallowing their dust. Guns heavy on their saddles, faces hard, carved out of cruelty and hunger. The mare in the corral snorted and stamped. The land itself seemed to brace. She whispered, barely more than air, "They've come." The rancher didn't answer. He stood there in the cabin's half-light, shoulders drawn, jaw locked. His eyes stayed on the approaching riders, but his hands, scarred, shaking faint, remained empty. The rifle leaned against the wall. He didn't touch it. Not yet. Outside, hooves closed in, circling, the sound like iron hammers driving stakes into the earth. The riders laughed, spit, voices cutting through the wind. "She's ours," one called. "Always was." Another spat tobacco near the porch steps, his grin sharp as a blade. "Hand her over, old man. Ain't no sense in bleeding for someone else's scraps." She clutched the edge of his coat then, tight, desperate, knuckles white against the worn fabric. That coat, frayed but heavy, smelled of smoke and rain. To her, it was anchor, shield, last refuge. To him, it was memory, of nights cold and alone, of keeping warmth when nothing else remained. Her grip trembled. His silence deepened. The fire cracked inside the cabin, spitting sparks. He stared at the wood grain of the table, at the tin cup still half full of black coffee. Steam curled and faded into nothing. The war in him was quiet but brutal. He had buried enough men to know what shooting meant. Each bullet a weight that never left his hands. The soil outside already held more blood than rain. But her fingers tightened around his coat. She was shaking, not from the cold, but from the memory of belonging to men who spoke her name like a curse. The riders circled again. Their horses breathed clouds into the cooling dusk. Every pass around the cabin was slower, closer, like wolves testing a door. "You hear me?" another voice barked. "She don't get to choose. She's marked. Ours." The rancher's breath came slow, deliberate. He moved not for the rifle, but for the window. His shadow stretched long against the wall as he stood there, watching. The men outside leaned forward in their saddles, expecting him to break, to shout, to beg. He did none of those things. Instead, he said nothing at all. The silence was heavier than any threat. The woman pressed her face against his shoulder, muffling a sob she refused to let them hear. Her hands twisted into his coat, as if by tearing it, she could make herself disappear. The hoofbeats slowed, dust drifted, settling like ash. The men spit again, restless, muttering. One kicked at the porch seat. Tep, wood splintering under his boot. The rancher finally moved, just a step, just enough to rest one hand against the back of the chair, the other brushing near the rifle stock, but not gripping it. The gesture alone drew the eyes of every man outside. For a long moment, no one spoke. Only the horses, shifting, snorting, impatient with the stillness. The rancher's eyes burned with something none of them could read. Regret, rage, sorrow, or all three tied into one unspoken vow. The fire hissed low, the night pressed close. And then, quiet as prayer, he whispered almost to himself. Not again. The words cracked the air like dry timber breaking. Outside, the riders stiffened. The woman clung tighter, her breath hot against the fabric of his coat. The land waited. The choice hung heavy. Blood or silence. The rifle leaned against the wall, patient as the past, and the hoofbeats kept circling. Night came hard. The fire in the cabin burned red, shadows crawling the walls like restless spirits. Outside, the riders lingered, circling in the dark, their laughter carrying thin across the plains. Inside, it was quieter, too quiet. She sat close to the fire, her hands trembling over the flames as though trying to thaw years of cold that never left her bones. The rancher leaned against the table, his coat slung loose over his shoulders, his breath deep but uneven. It was she who broke first. "They kept me like cattle," she whispered, voice raw, brittle as dry wood snapping. "Used me, sold me, took every bit till I was nothing." Her eyes didn't lift from the fire. Ash clung to her lashes like gray snow. The rancher's jaw worked, but no words came. He stared at the rifle in the corner, then at his own hands, scarred, cracked, stained deeper than dirt could ever clean. Finally, his voice came low, rough, like gravel dragged under boots. "I did worse," he said. "War took the man I was. Whiskey kept me from seeing the one I'd become. Rage." His breath shuddered. Rage buried the rest. The silence after was a wound all its own, two broken truths hanging heavy in the smoke, neither offering comfort, only recognition. Outside, the hoofbeats pressed closer. Taunts cut sharp through the night. A window shattered, glass raining like ice. The rancher pushed off the table, slower than he used to be, but with something steadier than whiskey. His hand reached for the rifle. It felt heavier than ever, the wood cold, iron merciless, like it remembered every sin it had carried. She stood then, barefoot, on the dirt floor. Her coat slipped from her shoulders, falling soundless. She moved to the door, chin high despite the tremor in her body. When they burst from the dark, the firelight caught them first, faces twisted, eyes gleaming with hunger. One grabbed at her arm. She struck back, wild, desperate, refusing to fold into their hands again. The rancher's rifle roared. The sound split the night. Horses screamed, men cursed, stumbled back into dust and flame. The fight was not long. It was raw, close, brutal. The air filled with smoke, sweat, and the ringing echo of choices too long delayed. He fought like a man who carried the ghosts of old battlefields, every shot dragging him further into the weight of his past. She fought like someone reclaiming breath for the first time in years. Then, a shot, a stumble. The rancher fell to one knee, blood blooming dark across his shirt. He pressed a hand against it, crimson seeping between his fingers, hot and steady, soaking into the dirt at his boots. Still, he fired again. One last burst of thunder that sent the riders scattering, retreating into the night, curses trailing behind them like smoke. The plains fell quiet. Only the fire cracked, steady, painting them in a red glow that looked almost holy. She dropped to his side, hands pressing against his wound, tears cutting clean lines through the dust on her face. He didn't look at her, not yet. His eyes stayed fixed on the door, on the silence that finally returned after years of noise. Only then did he whisper, voice faint, "Not yours anymore, not theirs." Blood seeped deeper into the dirt, soaking the earth like rain that hadn't come in years. The night held its breath, and for the first time, neither of them bowed. Morning crept in quiet. The storm had passed, leaving the world raw and rinsed, like the land itself had held its breath all night, and was only now remembering to breathe. The cabin stood scarred, but not fallen. Boards cracked, window shattered, blood still dark in the dirt near the doorway, but the fire inside burned steady, stubborn as life refusing to bow. He lay on the cot, skin pale, shirt soaked through, chest rising shallow but sure. Sweat clung to him like morning dew, running down the grooves of a face carved by war and years of dust. She sat beside him, sleeves rolled, hands steadier now than they had ever been. A strip of cloth pressed firm against his wound, her fingers working not with panic, but with quiet resolve. She didn't look like the same woman who had arrived beneath a blanket. Her hair hung loose, face streaked with ash and blood, but her eyes carried something unbroken now. He stirred, lids half opening, gaze meeting hers. No words passed, none needed. His silence had always been heavy, but this time it carried no wall, no weight of stone, only a soft surrender. She reached up, brushing the sweat from his brow with the back of her hand. His breath shivered, then steadied under her touch. For the first time, his eyes closed not in retreat, but in trust. Outside, the plains bore their scars. Fence posts leaning like tired men, soil split with cracks, a mare stamping nervously at the corral, tail flicking against the flies. And there, in the broken earth, wildflowers swayed. Yellow, fragile, stubborn things. They bent with the wind, but did not fall. Her gaze drifted toward them, and a faint smile tugged at her lips, small as dawn's first light. The fire crackled behind her, low and steady. Smoke curled toward the ceiling, carrying with it the scent of cedar and survival. She leaned closer, her voice breaking the hush, not with fear, not with defeat, but with something tender, almost new. Maybe. Her fingers lingered against his hand, rough against rough. Maybe I'm worth a dime after all. The words didn't echo. They settled, soft as dust on wood. He shifted, breath heavy, slipping into uneasy sleep. His chest rose, fell, rose again, still here, still breathing. She stayed beside him, one hand resting on his arm, the other tightening the bandage, her body angled toward the fire, as if guarding it, guarding him. Outside, wind carried the sound of coyotes far off, fading into the horizon. Morning light poured through the cracked boards, catching her face, gilding it gold, painting her not as a ghost of what had been taken, but as a woman still standing, the fire sin, apt. The wind sighed, and the wildflowers bent, but did not break. The screen faded with them swaying in the dirt, stubborn as survival. The story lingered, like smoke after flame.